Good morning. It's News from the Roots on Mountain Stream TV. Today is Thursday, August 1st, 2019. I'm Avram Friedman. Thanks for joining us this morning. We have a very special guest this morning, Brian McMahan, the chairman of the Jackson County Commission in Jackson County, North Carolina. Of course, we're broadcasting worldwide on the World Wide Web, and so when I say Jackson County, I imagine every state in the country has a Jackson County.
Probably.
But we are in Jackson County, North Carolina. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Brian.
Thank you for the invitation, and I very much look forward to the opportunity to be here and to talk about whatever we want to talk about.
Okay. Well, I'd like to hear a little bit about what's going on in the Jackson County Commission. But since this is your first time on the show, I'd like you to introduce yourself a little bit to the audience and tell us a little bit about your history in Jackson County. You are native to Jackson County. You were born and raised here?
That is correct. I am a native of Jackson County. Grew up here. My ancestors go back generations. Some of the very first settlers that crossed the balsams to settle the valleys of Jackson County and the mountain peaks, and so I have a long history here. This is my home, has always been my home. I have a great love for this community because of it being my home. And so I'm a product of our local education system. So many things that I'm involved with today from a professional perspective, I was a participant of in the early days or at times before. So I think it gives me a little bit more of a unique, sometimes perspective when I look at funding schools or funding emergency services. I'm a volunteer firefighter, have been for over 2 decades. So it gives me a little bit different of experience and perspective when it's my life.
Sure. And you were educated in the Smoky Mountain High School?
Yeah, I went to Scotts Creek Elementary, and then to Smoky Mountain High School. I believe I was the first class that attended Smoky Mountain all the way through. Because it used to be Civil Webster, and then there was Cullowhee High School, and then they had a consolidation effort and created what's now Smoky Mountain High School. And so that took place in the late 80s, and like I said, I believe 1988 was the first graduating class of Smoky Mountain High.
And that's when you graduated?
No, I started in 89.
Oh, okay.
So I would have been the first class that went 4 years and then graduated.
And then you went to Western Carolina University?
I attended Western Carolina University at Cullowhee and received a degree in political science with a minor in history.
Well, that's interesting. I studied political science in college as well, in New York, where I was born. And tell us a little bit about your ancestry. What nation did your ancestors originally come from?
It's very interesting. I took the DNA test.
Oh.
So I can, according to DNA, probably about 25% of my ancestors came from Ireland.
Okay.
Obviously with a name like McMahan. That's obvious. The other 25+% comes from the British Isles in general, from England and Scotland and Wales. And then I have about 25% that comes from Scandinavia. So that's totaled out to about 75%. And then the final 25% is Western Europe. Is a combination of several areas in Western Europe. A few from France, a little from Spain, and then down towards Turkey and some of those. So it's a good mixture.
Yeah.
I'm fairly well, I guess, come from Western Europe.
Did any Cherokee come into your
0%.
family? 0%.
And there's always this lore that every family has that we have Cherokee ancestry.
Yeah.
But the DNA test says that I have
Says no.
zero.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people around here do have some Cherokee.
And 3 of my cousins took the same test, and their results came back with the same genetic profile from an ancestral standpoint with 0 Cherokee.
Interesting.
So we feel sure that that's accurate.
So, what prompted your interest in becoming involved in politics?
I've always had an interest in government, just from as a child, watching current events, watching television, reading the writings about politics and some of the movements, and just witnessing firsthand. So it sparked my interest, and I felt like this is something I would like to be a part of.
Okay. Any of your ancestors, your parents or your grandparents were involved in politics?
None that I know of from an elective standpoint. I think my great-grandfather served as a justice of the peace,
Okay.
but that's the only, and I think that position was appointed. It wasn't elected. But no, I'm probably the first, to my knowledge, to be involved at the kind of level that I am.
Now, there are different philosophies about governing on the local level. And I know, like, as a community activist, I have interacted with many of the local officials throughout Western North Carolina, and there is a stark difference from one person to the next about what they believe their role is as a county commissioner, or even a city council person, or a city commissioner, as the case in Silva. And sometimes I'll run into, like, if asking a resolution to be passed on the state level, I'll ask county commissioners or local government officials to sign on to a resolution, and very often I'll be told by some local officials, well, that's really not our purview. That, we deal with local issues. We let the state government do what it's doing, and then the federal government do what it's doing. And that's not our business. That we have a different purpose. And then I have other local officials, you among them, which I really appreciate, by the way, is willing to consider issues that are on the state level and even the national level, because I think perhaps you realize that what happens in Raleigh, what happens in Washington, D.C., impacts Jackson County. And so, would you talk a little bit about that and what your philosophy is about local governing? Yeah.
Well, first, as an elected official, I represent the people, and I'm supposed to be the voice for the people who live within my jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So I always try to represent what I believe the people of this area are advocating on behalf of. What is the beliefs? What are the primary issues that affect us? And obviously, there are from time to time there are differing opinions, but I try to represent the people that I feel like that we represent. This is who elected me. But so a lot of these topics are very important to citizens like yourself. But when you look at local government in North Carolina, we are a little bit unique in that we're different than, for say, like Florida or other states. We have no power. We are an extension of state government. So in North Carolina, county government, municipal government, but it's particularly county government, can only perform the functions that we are allowed to perform by the state. So in a lot of ways, we're an extension of state government, and we act on behalf of the state for local matters. So when I think about it, when I think about someone asking me to adopt a resolution to share a local viewpoint about a topic from a local perspective, to share that resolution with state government, then it makes perfect sense as a an extension of the state, as someone who is connected to the state, representing local people, that it's a great conduit, a great avenue to share, to channel that information from one area straight to the central government, the state government in our state. To me, that just makes perfect sense. I mean, I am the official extension of state government here locally. Why not use that connection to be able to provide that information directly to the lawmakers, to the people who can make the decisions?
And I've seen the impact of that over the years of my activism. It really makes a difference when legislators in Raleigh hear that the county government, for instance, in 2001 or 2002, when we passed the Clean Smokestacks Act in North Carolina, Jackson County Commission was the first county commission to endorse that bill. Mm-hmm. And then other counties followed. And that was just very powerful. When I stood up in front of the committee that was dealing with that in Raleigh, and I announced all these counties that had commissioners, local governments that had endorsed this legislation, you could see the impact it had, and it was so much more powerful than just me standing up and giving my opinion as a citizen. You know, because as you say, you speak for the county, you speak for the people of the county, and so that's very powerful.
And I think to add to that, when you think about being an extension of state government, and as a county, we have no power on our own. So if there are issues that have come before us that we need a change. We need a law that allows us the flexibility to do X, Y, Z, and the state hasn't given us that authority, and it's created an issue within our community. The only way that I can deal with that issue is for the state government to allow me to do it. So it makes perfect sense for me to lobby the state, whether it be by means of resolution, proclamations, whether it be by making phone calls and visits, and I've done many of those myself to legislators.
That's
because it's just the way that we communicate. Because I can't, if they don't give me the power to do it, if they don't adopt the law, if they don't create the law in Raleigh, then I have no force here.
Understood. So I'm sure there are issues, for instance, Medicaid expansion. Mm-hmm. An issue that impacts thousands of people in Jackson County. Has the county commission communicated with the state government at all on that issue to express the fact that, hey, we have thousands of people here that need that insurance?
We have not adopted any resolution per se about Medicaid expansion in North Carolina in this current term.
But is there
but I have had private conversations personally with legislators.
So that's what is there some mechanism that provides that voice for county commissions to the state government? I mean, is there any time when there's an official meeting of those bodies from all over the state? I know that there's an organization or an association of county commissioners.
There is.
In the state. And you were the president of that.
Well, I was the president-elect.
Okay.
I was soon to be sworn in as the president, but then I got defeated in the 2010 election and was never able to take office.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so I got about that close.
Yeah.
But on a local level, I think first, we attempt to have good communication, good open channels of communication with our legislators, and both on the state and the federal or congressional leaders, and invite them regularly to come to our meetings and to have an opportunity to sit down and have a dialogue with them. And
you're talking about our local legislators.
Local legislators and even our congressional and federal.
Okay.
So we welcome opportunities, and from time to time when they are in district, we will set up meetings with them, and where we'll sit down at a table just like you and I are talking, and I'll say, these are the topics that are important to us in Jackson County. Can you help us out on these? What's happening right now concerning these? And just get sort of a very up-to-date picture of what's going on in Raleigh and Washington and how things are moving concerning those topics. Then we have councils of government, where in North Carolina there are divided into regions, and in the far west we are Region A, which is 7 western counties, and we meet quarterly, and at those meetings there's legislative updates.
So who attends those meetings?
Usually members of the General Assembly will come. Jim Davis, our current state senator, Joe Sam Queen, our current House member, as well as Mike Clampett prior to him, over in Macon County for the district, I guess that's House Seat 120. So whoever's...
That's Joe Sam Queen.
No, that's...
yeah, it's 119.
Yeah.
Fresnel?
No. Corbin.
Corbin, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's Representative Corbin's district, and he'll come to those meetings. So we have an opportunity to, as a group, county and municipal governments, to hear updates from them. And then sometimes we'll have not so much the federal legislators, but a congressman, but sometimes their staff will come. And then, as you said, we've got on a statewide perspective, we have the County Commissioners Association and then the League of Municipalities, and they have events, district and statewide, where they'll be able to attract the governor or attract the senators or someone to come. And then even there are times we go to Washington, and we'll have a congressional breakfast. And all the delegation from North Carolina, from the federal, will attend the breakfast and give updates. So we have opportunities to interact, and I always try to take those opportunities and use them as wisely as I can to say, hey, I want to give this packet to you, Congressman, and I want you to take it, and this is some important issues right now that we're facing, and we need your help on this.
And so are those meetings... Are they effective? I mean, do they have a real impact? They're more than a social gathering, right?
Yes.
You actually talk about issues, and that's where real things actually happen.
One of the most effective form of lobbying is one elected official talking to another elected official. Because, here again, it's not to diminish you or anyone else, but
Sure.
the fact is that I'm representing 40-some thousand people.
Right.
And when I can make an appointment and go into a senator's office and sit there and have private conversation with a senator and share my viewpoint and what I feel like the pulse or the heartbeat of our community is and how our community feels about an issue, I think that's got a profound impact, and so it's important.
Yeah.
And I try to take advantage of those opportunities.
This is a dynamic. I'm not sure you want to talk about this, but maybe you do, and you don't have to if you don't want to. But there's different philosophies of governing, and there's some very real differences between Democrats and Republicans in terms of those philosophies of government. In general, and it's not 100% true, but Republicans have more the philosophy of as little government as possible, and Democrats have a more activist perspective in terms of the purpose of government and what it should be doing. So do you find that beyond rhetoric, is that true on the ground level? Does that actually take place, when the county commission is run by Republicans, for instance? Does it do less purposely? Does it advocate less for the people of the county, or does it, uh, do Democrats actively try to do more? I mean, is that, and I'm not saying this with the idea of trying to make Republicans sound like the bad guys. You know,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what it's like in the actual boardroom. You know, when things are happening, is that dynamic really taking place?
I will say, and this is my opinion,
Yeah.
I will say that the rhetoric and the hype that we see on television and that we hear on radio and that we read about sometimes is inflated and doesn't exist at the level that it really is being portrayed.
At least on the local level.
On the local level, for sure.
Yeah.
There is, I won't say never or none, but there's very little rhetoric, political rhetoric that takes place on the local level. And I have found that in my tenure, I receive as equal of a welcome from the Republicans in the legislature and the Republicans in the Congress. They equally welcome me as much as the Democrats, and I have been met with great opportunities to share my vision and my thoughts, and it's not looked about it from a partisan standpoint. I really feel like I have a great working relationship with them, and that they really genuinely want to hear what I have to say and take what I offer as comments as good information that they use to value to make their opinions.
Yeah. I mean, well, on the federal level and on the state level, still we do see the dynamic of strictly partisan voting.
Correct.
You know, I mean, it has nothing to do with what is right or wrong or anything else. If they just, you know, if the leadership decides that this is not going to pass, not one Republican will vote for it.
Correct.
You know?
And we have had issues locally,
Mm-hmm.
and they're few and far between. It's hard to make school safety a partisan issue. It's hard to make Parks and Rec a partisan issue. It's hard to make garbage collection partisan. And, you know, there's parts of it that you could have a different opinion on, but most of these local issues are not partisan. And we're just trying to make good decisions from a nonpartisan perspective. But now there are times where we will have a party line vote. One of those examples, if you adopting a resolution against fracking, that was a very partisan discussion. And the view of whether or not you support the environmental practice or you don't support it, and it really came down to a philosophical viewpoint. And those kind of votes will probably pull out a partisan vote.
And the other resolution was the vote to overturn the Citizens United decisions.
The Citizens United.
I don't understand why that is a partisan issue. Well, I guess I do understand why it is a partisan issue, because one party is getting more money from corporate interests than the other party. But in terms of your belief in democracy and one person, one vote, doesn't seem like it should be a partisan issue.
It should. To me, it doesn't.
And on the federal level, I mean, that whole issue came to bear over the McCain-Feingold, which was a bipartisan bill that passed because everybody was recognizing the need to get them money out of politics. It was becoming a burden, you know. Candidates in both parties were spending, and now are, because that was overturned, are spending most of their time raising money to run for office, and it doesn't leave them a lot of time to do the business of representing us.
Absolutely.
You know, So I think that dynamic is still, but I think certainly it seems apparent to me that on the local level, that dynamic is not so much there.
Yeah.
You know, other than maybe voting on a resolution about that issue, but in terms of what gets done on the local issue, I think there are certain things that are apparent that they need to happen. You know, if you have to vote money for a new school or something like that, it's going to get bipartisan support. It doesn't really matter who is.
And I have taken occasion. I know when we voted on an education issue here in Jackson County some time back, a couple of years ago, I even made a statement at one of our meetings that we have a long history in Jackson County of bipartisan support for education. And at the time, I, as chair, and the vice chair was Mr. Charles Elders, a well-respected man in this community, and he and I stood up and shook hands, demonstrating solidarity that we were going to support education, and it was not a partisan issue.
Yeah.
And that we as a community were rallying together, irregardless of what labels have been placed on us, to support what's right and what's good for our community.
Yeah.
And we've done that on several other issues, and I feel very strong that kind of action needs to be highlighted. And I referenced that in a social media post not long ago when we were able to adopt a balanced budget in Jackson County. And it was a unanimous vote of both Democrat and Republicans on our board. We all voted unanimously to approve the budget because it was good for our community. And yeah, there were things that maybe someone wanted more than someone else, and we had a lot of discussions back and forth, but at the end of the day, we have to put the people first. Not personal agendas, not political agendas, not party philosophy. We got to do what's best for the people of this community.
So what are some of the issues that the commission is grappling with now?
Well, land use management will always be an issue. As population grows, I know we're getting ready to enter into the 2020 census, and I think we're all going to be surprised at how much Jackson County is growing. And so that's always going to be a topic as time goes on because more people are coming here. So land use management, controlling land use, controlling where we develop, how we develop, to be done in a way that is smart and has the least impact on our environment is important.
That's an interesting issue. I mean, the dynamics have changed as the population has grown. Obviously, there are limited resources in everywhere, you know. But maybe specifically in Jackson County, I mean, there are water issues and water waste issues. For instance, erosion issues because of the topographical realities here.
Mm-hmm.
When I first moved here in 1983, and at that time, you could get a shotgun pointed at you if you said the word zoning. And I know there's still resistance to that in some quarters, but I think maybe a greater part of the population now understands the needs to do some planning. And what's your sense about that issue? I mean, when you talk about planning, does the issue of zoning come up, and what's the political realities of that on the local level right now?
I think you're exactly right in your description of 1983 Jackson County. And when I entered into politics locally, that concept was still somewhat very much alive and well. And to be honest, I ran on somewhat a no zoning platform because it's almost a cultural thing. Mountain people have had this independence, and it just goes back through history about some of the things that have happened and how sometimes mountain people felt like they've got the short end of the stick, and right. So it just goes back to wanting to be able to control their own destiny. And
Understandable.
yeah, it's understandable, and it goes back to this whole philosophy, less government. It's a very conservative approach. So it's hard. It was hard for people to embrace zoning, and I will say that during my tenure, I have evolved greatly in my viewpoints about zoning, and I have seen firsthand where zoning has benefited. You won't hear this from many politicians, but there are times where I feel like maybe I made some bad choices in the early days, and if I had to do over again, maybe I might just voted a different way. Yeah. Mountain hillside development ordinance is one thing. I didn't approve of the process in which we went forward. I voted against the ordinance in the beginning, mainly because of the process.
Steep slope.
Steep slope. Yeah. I voted against it. I voted against the moratorium on development. I voted against a couple of those ordinances that were very regulatory in nature. Do I support them? 100%.
Yeah, you do.
My big hang up a lot was with the process that we were going through. But today, looking back, I totally support them, and it was a good decision for this county.
It's an interesting dynamic that I witnessed. I don't know, and I'm sure you remember this. When an asphalt company came in and wanted to build an asphalt plant in Cherokee on the boundary near Qualla, and the people there were completely upset about it. And there was a big meeting in the community building there in Qualla, and I don't know how many people, maybe 150 or 200 people were in there, and were talking with the asphalt plant owner or builder who wanted to build it there. And somebody stood up and said, "You can't build that here because this is a residential community." And the asphalt operator said, "Well, is it zoned as a residential community? If it's not zoned as a residential community, it's not a residential community, and we can do anything we want here, And I think that exchange really woke up a lot of people.
Yeah, we had on the books an industrial development ordinance, and I don't know what year that you were talking about in this incident down in the Qualla area, but
it was late 90s, I guess.
Yeah.
1990s.
And I think right after that, the county adopted an industrial development ordinance, which somewhat was really vague, but it was, I think, the very first building block that has helped progressively lead us to where we're at today with a much more defined zone districts.
Yeah.
Because I went to Tuckasegee. I spoke in the courtroom on behalf of the board when there was a quarry
the rock quarry
to be built in Tuckasegee, and I referenced the industrial development ordinance, which was in play at that time, and how it violated that ordinance on behalf of the Jackson County.
So what was the gist of that ordinance? I mean, that didn't specifically label different areas as industrial or residential.
It didn't label or zone areas, but it created a parameter to say these types of industry, heavy polluting industry, mining, et cetera, cannot be located within so many feet of a school or a church or a private residence or certain types of water features. So it regulated where they could be located.
That's interesting, yeah.
And that was the perspective and the approach that the county took at that time. Instead of trying to zone a district, they just tried to say, we will permit these things anywhere in Jackson County. You can put it in any community as long as within these distances, setbacks.
Which has the same practical effect as zoning in some ways, but less specific. So
correct.
Yeah. Okay. That's very interesting. So what other issues are coming to the fore in Jackson County right now?
Well, from an issue standpoint, like I said, we're working on land use issues, but one of the things that infrastructure, you know, travel, road infrastructure, that's another big
Road.
issue.
Yeah.
What
What about the road?
Yeah, you know, obviously it's a complicated process. I serve as the county's representative on the Division 14's regional planning organization, RPO for DOT. And I will have to say, a lot of people may not understand, but DOT does have a very defined process in which they now build roads. And roads it goes through a lengthy process where there's buy-in and approval from local leaders through public input and an equation where data is used, traffic counts and traffic accident counts, and all this stuff that comes together and scores are placed on projects. And it's all driven by those scores. And so, you know, for example, with Highway 107, that's a project that's been in the works for a long time. I think back in the early 2000s, when the debate had continued for a couple of decades about whether to build a bypass, the one common understood objective was 107 needed to be addressed, and it needed to be adequate, at least first, before anything else was done.
Yeah, I mean, and
that's why we're at today.
This goes back to planning, or the lack of planning.
The lack of.
I think, you know, when people just didn't anticipate, nobody did, either our community leaders or just the people who were building businesses along the road, how the population would grow and how it would develop without some restriction, or some, maybe restriction isn't even the right word, but some planning on how it would be put together so that you wouldn't have 100 different places where people could come onto the highway, or, you know, and because that road serves both as a local street and as a highway.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. You have all these places where people are coming onto the road, leaving the road, coming from all directions, and it's nuts. And there's a lot of accidents because of that.
Sometimes I like to think back to what that road 107 from the intersection at Walgreens, from that point out to the high school. What that road, how much that road has changed.
Yeah.
In the 1970s, I can think back to the late 1970s, driving out that road, and what it looked like.
Yeah.
A 2-lane road and limited businesses. And I could sit here and name just about on two hands the businesses from that point to that point, and they were few and far between. And look how much growth has occurred since then.
Well, especially since Walmart and Lowe's were put out there, and Ingalls. I mean, I remember when Ingalls was built.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the first development that I remember. But the Love's Field, you know, I mean, has changed into Walmart and Lowe's now. Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of development that's taken place even since I've been here. The nature of Jackson County, really, that sort of defines it, right? That corridor, right there. And that's something that just has to be dealt with. And from what I understand the DOT has said is that even if they had built a bypass, it wouldn't have alleviated that traffic, because most of it's come from Swain, Franklin, and Silva going through there, and, you know.
Going to Cullowhee. Or
to and
south.
back and forth from
Yeah.
Cullowhee. So the bypass really would not have alleviated that traffic. But nonetheless, something has to be done. And what's interesting to me, I have a little bit of a science fiction mind going, but 10 years from now, this it may even be a moot point because believe it or not, the technologies are being developed now. Instead of cars, we may be flying around in drones. 10 years from now, self-automated cars, that will make road development a moot point.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, and that sort of segues into, I think, another topic that is really important right now, is access to internet, to broadband.
Yes.
And there again, when it goes back to our relationship with the state, as an extension of state government, we're only allowed to do what the state allows us to do. And if it's not specifically spelled out in the general statutes or the Constitution, then we can't do it. But in the case of broadband, in the case of getting into the broadband business or using taxpayer money on a local level to facilitate the expansion of broadband, we are expressly prohibited in North Carolina. Not only is it's not a case it's just not written in the general statutes, but there is legislation that exists that prohibits counties from participating.
On the state level?
On the state level.
When did that pass?
I don't remember the date, but that's been in existence for quite some time. So, right now county government could help put in a sewer line. County government could provide local funding to help put in a water line. We could help put in roads. We could help pay to put in whatever other kind of public utility. But today, broadband is to me the most important public utility almost.
Well, it's certainly up there. I wonder what special interest was able to push through a law which would prohibit local governments from bringing in broadband. The telecommunication industry has a very strong lobby. Yeah.
I'll just say that. And in this past spring, back in early spring, late winter, the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners every 2 years holds a legislative goals conference where counties from all across the state come together and debate issues that are relevant to county government and what we want to lobby the legislature for or against. And the number one goal that all 100 counties agreed on was that we need greater broadband in North Carolina. We need more access. People in the rural parts of eastern North Carolina and the rural parts of western North Carolina have so little access, and it's so critical. There's so much to today. Education, all of your education now is almost done through technology. Does it make much sense for us to give all these students mobile devices, laptop computers, iPads, tablets, and tell them to go home and download their homework assignment when they go home to the holler or mountaintop they live on? They have no access. So we see a lot of people going to McDonald's and the public library and anywhere else they can get free Wi-Fi so that they can just be able to complete an assignment.
And business depends so much.
Business depends on it. Banking, healthcare. It is unreal if you start adding it up and look at what the economic impact is to us. So we have great access to broadband through the major first mile infrastructure. We have a fiber that runs right through this community, and we have access. This region has access second to really very few other places in the country. I mean, most metropolitan areas don't have as good access as we do, but it's the last mile, the middle mile, the last mile, when you start trying to get those connections out to homes. And that's where we're running into the problem. And that's why being able to invest in infrastructure Wireless seems to be the preferred route method in the mountains, because then we're not having to provide expensive utility lines in the ground. So it's just being able to get to that point to be able to facilitate and help, because right now there is not an interest from a telecommunications company standpoint to provide that access.
And I can't imagine why the state would pass a law prohibiting local communities from addressing that issue.
Yeah, well, it exists.
I believe you. I just, I can't imagine, well, I'm afraid I can't imagine. It's all has to do with money somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I wonder if did that pass, like, when did, I'll have to do some research
Yeah.
to find out when that passed and what's going on there. But that's certainly something to advocate.
Well, so that was voted the
defeat.
number one issue, and so every time we have
Yeah.
some kind of legislative opportunity, we advocate that, hey, we need this.
Yeah.
The people need access to the internet.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a very interesting issue. Well, is there? We've been on the air for about an hour now. Is there anything else you want to talk to people about or say to our audience? Let me preclude that by saying I hope you'll come back again.
Oh, absolutely.
And we'll talk about other issues as they arise.
I would like to just conclude by saying I think it's vitally important to our democracy that people participate. And the first way that they can participate is voting.
Mm-hmm.
It's very sad that we have so many people that choose not to vote. And I know I met with a lady, and I share this story. I met with an elderly lady back during this last campaign, who was in her 90s. And sometimes when you say elderly, people don't want to say, well, that's not elderly or not. I think 90s qualify for elderly. But she told me, she said, honey, said, I've never voted. She said, and this is what caught my attention. She said, it's my right not to vote. I said, well, it is your right. But it's important. And it's also your right to vote.
People died for that right.
People died for that right.
Yeah.
They didn't die for your right not to vote. So I would encourage people to vote. It is vitally important to our democracy that people vote. And then I would encourage people to participate, show up to meetings. It's really sad that we have 3 meetings a month and various committee meetings, and then sometimes special meetings. Sometimes we may meet 5, 6, 7 times a month. And this room will hold the audience that will attend on most days. People just don't have a concern. People don't have an interest in showing up to see government or to speak. And so I would encourage people to participate by attending government meetings, offering your comments. I have seen the process work. I have seen issues come before our board where maybe the board would have voted one way, but because there was such a outcry from the community, and we had such impassioned comments from speakers who went to the podium, one right after the other, they were able to convince board members that they needed to vote another way.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
And so it's important for people to participate and to be there. And then volunteer to serve on boards. We have a hard time finding people that are interested in giving of their time to serve on various boards that have a significant impact in the policy and the bureaucracy of this community. And so participate that way. Run for office. I mean, there's so many ways that you could get involved,
Yeah.
but so many people choose to just stay home and not participate in any level. At least vote, and then do all the other things as well. So that would be my concluding remarks is, it's your government. Because in this country we say, we the people. And I would encourage everyone to live up to the we part of it and to be active.
Brian, thank you again so
Thank you,
much
sir.
for being here, and as I said, I hope you'll be back,
Oh, well.
and we'll talk about current issues as they come along, and thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Okay.